Are we ready to roll?
Is it recording? Okay.
Are we on? All right, I believe it's time to call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the 191st meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. Today is Thursday, March 9th. We are at 625 Broadway in Albany. This is the DEC building. We have some people attending by WebEx, and I hope they can hear me okay. The meeting is called to order 10:31 or so, and we will begin with the roll call. I'd like to begin the roll call by welcoming Brian Irwin to the table. This is the first meeting that we're attending together in person. You're the director of the State Council of Parks, and just feel free to, I'm gonna call the roll, and people are gonna introduce themselves and say a little bit about their role on the State Review Board. So we'll start with you, Brian.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. And thank you all for having me here. Again, Brian Irwin, acting chair of the State Council of Parks, also chair of the Long Island State Park Commission. I'm from the east end of Long Island, born and bred on the North Fork. So bit of a trip to get here, but it's always happy to be in our state's capital. My role, I guess, as State Council chair is to provide that perspective from the parks end of things on our Historical Preservation Board. And I'm looking forward to being here. So obviously I'm very keen on the history of New York. So this is the toy department for me. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Doug Pirelli, chair of this board. I'm a clinical assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Buffalo. I serve on the New York Archaeological Council board as well. Moving on in alphabetical order, Wint Aldrich.
Wint Aldrich, former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation at State Parks. Delighted to be here. I guess I'm in the category of historian.
And I'm in the category of archaeologist, just to be clear. And the board, composition of the board includes 2 archaeologists. Carol Clark.
Good morning. I'm Carol Clark. I'm an adjunct professor of historic preservation at Columbia University, and I also teach in the field at Pratt Institute and NYU, and I'm a former deputy commissioner here at State Parks.
Thank you. J.D. Lorenzo. Wayne Goodman. No Wayne. Kristen Herron.
I'm Kristen Herron, Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums at the New York State Council on the Arts, and I'm a proxy for our chair.
Erica Krieger.
I'm an assistant director at the New York State Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes. I deal with variances there. I'm here representing the Secretary of State. I'm also an architect, so I fill that spot.
Thank you. Jennifer Lemack.
My name is Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum. I serve as the proxy to the Commissioner of Education, and I'm here as a historian.
Gretchen Soren. Chuck Vandry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Vandry. I'm an archaeologist, and I represent the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Moving now to the next agenda item, approval of December 2022 minutes. Folks have had a chance to review those. Any questions or comments about the past meeting minutes? Do I hear a motion to approve? A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carries.
Seconded. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Deputy Commissioner's report. Daniel is not here, and that will be read by Kathy Howe. Thank you, Kathy.
Want to hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. I, Kathy Howe, I'm reporting out today on behalf of Deputy Commissioner Daniel McKay, as both Daniel and Dan McEnany, Division Director, are traveling back from Washington, D.C. congressional meetings and the National Council of State Historic Preservation Officers Spring Board meeting. There are a number of highlights to feature since the December SRB meeting. First of all, the executive budget proposal is notable for its strong support for the agency operational budget, capital program, and staffing. The capital program is proposed to continue at level funding of $200 million annually. Last year, the legislature added an additional $50 million to Parks Capital Fund. Also, the executive budget proposed a 5-year reauthorization of the commercial and homeowner rehabilitation tax credit programs. This proposed reauthorization is welcomed a year early, ahead of the current December 2024 sunset, and would extend the program through 2029. In related news, Assemblyman Kerry Warner and Senator Tim Kennedy have introduced legislation to further enhance the New York State Commercial Rehabilitation Credit. This bill would, one, reauthorize the program for a 10-year period, and two, raise the cap on the commercial credit from $5 million to as high as $15 million for buildings that have long been vacant. In the Bureau of Historic Sites, the hiring of a new painting conservator brings the conservation labs to full capabilities after a series of retirements and pandemic-delayed hirings. Daniel and Greg Smith, Bureau Director, are most appreciative of the commissioners and the agency's commitment to assuring the Bureau of Historic Sites' long-term capabilities to serve our state historic sites and agency collections with these new hires. The National Park Service announced this week that New York State led the nation, go New York, in the use of the federal rehabilitation credit in federal fiscal year 2021-22, totaling $1.195 billion in private investment in historic income-producing structures. New York State also led the nation in the 5-year cumulative use ranking with over $3.9 billion in historic structure investments realized in New York State over that time frame. Advance. Chelsea? Is it the right? Okay, I'll continue. So, as noted earlier, senior staff at the division have been meeting with, they actually met, finishing up their meetings on their way home. They met with 19 congressional offices in Washington, D.C. They were wearing their tennis shoes, running from office to office to discuss agency funding and legislative priorities. The Division for Historic Preservation receives 40% of its annual operational funding from the National Park Service. This is through the Historic Preservation Fund, or HPF. The staff who were down there requested members of the New York State congressional delegation support a $225 million allocation from the Historic Preservation Fund in support of funding SHPO offices nationally. So New York State, just so you know, receives as much as $1.6 million annually in operational support from the Historic Preservation Fund. Okay. This allocation also funds multiple grant programs administered by the National Park Service that we have tapped into, including the Centennial grants for Rev War affiliated sites and funding for underrepresented communities, which New York State has used to nominate LGBTQ sites to the National Register. And just as an aside, our staff at DHP prepared several packets of information for the various congressional representatives in Washington. Some of them, for example, here we're highlighting how New York State has tapped into the Historic Preservation Fund. I'm not sure how well you can read it from where you are, but you can see hopefully some of the statistics there. Go to the next one. In these packets that we provided to the different congressional offices, we, went by each district. There's actually 26 districts in New York State. They visited 19 representatives of those districts, and we tried to feature each congressional district, highlight things in the various districts to show what great work we're doing here in New York State. Next, please. Or not. Okay. And, yep, other ones in District 20, out in Western or Central New York, thanking those who are our good friends in Washington, such as Congressman Tonko, for really supporting the HPF fund. And here we are way out in Western New York in Buffalo. And one more slide I wanted to show. And the other thing that we did, which was kind of fun, this was behind the scenes, in preparing these materials for these visits, our staff kind of worked with putting little cheat sheets for all of us, especially for Dan and Daniel, to know, well, what do we know about these congressional representatives? You know, have they been, for the existing ones, have they been supportive of the HPF in the past? Brian Higgins from Western New York has always been supportive. Some have not been supportive. Some are brand new, and we shall see. So that was a helpful thing to put together. Okay, let me go back to the report here. So staff also, when they were down in Washington, requested the New York State congressional members consider co-sponsorship of legislation enhancing the federal rehabilitation tax credit program. The legislation is being introduced today in Congress to make the federal credit more impactful for small projects, increasing the federal credit to 30% for these projects and providing nonprofits with easier access to the incentives by making it easier to bring for-profit partners into the redevelopment partnerships. As I said, that legislation is being introduced today as we speak in the House of Representatives. Daniel and Dan report productive and encouraging conversations with House members on both sides of the aisles in these matters. And finally, Dan McEnany encouraged Daniel to share the agency's news that recently the NPS awarded our agency $85,000 in funding from the Underrepresented Communities Grant. DHP is receiving $60,000 to develop a nomination for Marcus Garvey Park in New York City, which hosted the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place on 6 Sundays between June and August and featured performances by Stevie Wonder, Mahalia Jackson, Nina Simone, The Fifth Dimension, the Staple Singers, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Sly and the Family Stone, and the Chambers Brothers, among others. The 2021 Academy Award-winning documentary, not sure how many of you have seen it. If you haven't, you should. Summer of Soul has brought renewed attention to the importance of not just the festival, but the park where this took place, occurring during the same summer as Woodstock, which is listed on the National Register. The office has also received $25,000 of that underrepresented money for the Yiddish Art Theater in New York City. It's an avant-garde theater group. They're going to amend that nomination because there was a strong connection in terms of breaking narrative and casting barriers in its performance in New York City's LGBTQ history. So I thank you for letting me present this today. At this point, I wanted to turn it over to I guess first to maybe Doug to report out on briefly on the State Council of Parks, which occurred, I guess, this week. And then he'll be followed by Brian Irwin, who will report out Parks and Trails New York Advocacy Day, in which he participated. Thank you.
I don't have too much to say. I just want to inform the group here that I did attend the SCOPE meeting, State Council of Parks meeting remotely, so that I could be here in person today. Most of what I was going to say was a repeat of the report that I gave at the State Council of Parks meeting, which Kathy just covered very nicely. I just do want to touch on one thing, though, and that's the York Hall nomination that we're going to be considering today. I did say a word about that. It's a facility that's being renovated by outside partners as a venue for musical and theatrical productions. Will likely be the first facility within the New York State Park to utilize the state and federal tax programs. That's exciting. We certainly want to see more of that. Projects in New York State parks, I just want to say, are qualified for both a 20% federal and 20 or 30% New York State credit, regardless of the census tract limitations outside the park. So that's important to keep in mind. Attending the SCOPE meeting was great. I'm really looking forward to the fall meeting in person, which I think is going to be at John Brown Farm in the North Country. So excited about that. And I'll turn it over to Brian
Thank you all. And once again, I appreciate your having me here today. Yesterday was Park Advocacy Day up on the Hill, and we had a robust attendance from throughout the state, not just state park commissioners, my fellow commissioners, but other advocates for the state, other interest groups. So we had a very good spread throughout the state. It's important because there's just a lot of other groups that are up on the Hill at the same time. We were bumping into myriad groups and color-coded T-shirts. The good news is there was no Park Discouragement Day opposite of ours. There's no bizarro Park Advocacy Day saying, no, don't give the parks funding. We're generally pushing on open doors. But I think it's important if we're not there, then the thought is, well, maybe parks, and by extension, maybe things like historical preservation, maybe they're full, maybe they're good, and we have other mouths to feed. So it's good for us all to be there. One thing we're going to be working on with Park Advocacy Day, with PTNY and OSI, is we do have an advantage. And with all respect to those other color-coded T-shirts there, and they all have important issues that they were advocating for, many of which personally I also believe in. But we have the best stage for a lot of these projects. So we're starting to have, in our commissions, we're starting to have some of these elected officials to our parks so they can see not only how great these parks are and how beautiful they are, but also then we can point out a few things that we may need. And maybe that's encapsulating the overall budget request we'll make in March, in a subsequent March, or maybe that becomes part of a SAM grant. And I'm thinking things like York Hall at Nissaquag, being able to point out some of the great things that are happening there, but then also to pivot and say, but look at all these other buildings that are up here that are also a public safety issue. It's just a great way to play, so Park Advocacy Day becomes the punctuation mark on the sentence that's written throughout the year. So all in all, we had a great day, but the work continues throughout the year. We're not just going to rely on early March as our one day to hit our elected officials. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ryan. The other thing I would add in attending the scope meeting is recognize the importance of friends groups, which I was not super familiar with, but I'm becoming involved in starting one for the Cataract House Park in Niagara Falls. And, speaking about funding and resources and getting people together, the friends groups are really important for some of these state parks and some of the buildings. So just wanted to send a shout out to friends groups and how well organized they seem to be in New York State. Okay, moving on. Historic Albany Foundation presentation.
And actually right on schedule.
Yeah, we're back on schedule here. The next item on the agenda is the National Register nomination reviews, and Chelsea Towers is going to introduce and acknowledge guests and survey and NR staff. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us as we work through these technical issues of hybrid meetings. But anyway, thank you for joining us both in person and remotely, especially our nomination sponsors, consultants who have worked tirelessly in conjunction with our National Register staff to prepare the nominations you'll be seeing today. We also welcome property owners joining us who have persisted through the nomination process in order to honor the historic significance of their properties. We have a great mix of nominations today that recognize the significance in a wide range of areas, including architecture, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, health and medicine, Jewish heritage, entertainment and recreation, and many more. Of these nominations, the majority are honorary, which isn't always the case, with 3 in support of commercial tax credit applications. Thanks to Kathleen Frank, who helped review these nominations in the final stages of their preparation, and a special thank you to Aaron Cernigy, who did the PowerPoint presentation that we're all enjoying today. For our guests who are remote, I apologize. You will not be able to verbally communicate with us here. Hopefully you're getting audio now, though. Some of our sponsors have prepared comments ahead of time and provided them to the National Register staff, so they'll be reading those at the end of each presentation if they were provided. We apologize to everyone remotely for any inconvenience this limitation may cause, but thanks for understanding. Lastly, just remember, board members, to turn on your mics when you're speaking and speak clearly into them as well, so hopefully our guests at home can hear. With that being said, we'll get started in Erie County.
All right, good morning, everybody. Lustron House, Westchester Model M02, number 01310, rolls right off the tongue, located at the town of Eden, Erie County, New York, is an excellent intact example of a Lustron pre-manufactured house with an intact coordinating Model G1 Lustron garage, both in the surf blue color option. The house and garage are eligible for the state and national registers under criterion C in the area of architecture and engineering as representative examples of the Lustron Company's pre-manufactured housing from the mid-20th century. Lustron houses emerged in the post-World War II era as one solution to the housing shortage for returning GIs using the existing industrial and mass production capacity and technology developed during the war. The vision of inventor and industrialist Carl Strandland, Lustron houses presented a type of kit house with mass-produced vitreous enamel-coated steel panels that could be shipped across the country and assembled on site. The Lustron Corporation was founded in 1947 in Columbus, Ohio, with architects Roy Blass and Morris H. Beckman designing the first prototype, the Esquire House, that year. In April of 1948, 40 prefabricated Lustron houses rolled off the assembly line, accompanied by an active promotional and advertising campaign. The photo at the bottom shows basically the entire kit all laid out, so you get a sense that these are puzzle pieces that fit together. The company ultimately produced several different 2- and 3-bedroom models, including the Westchester, Newport, and Meadowbrook, each available in standard and deluxe versions, and were offered in popular pastel shades of dove gray, maize yellow, surf blue, or desert tan. Houses were marketed as easier to maintain than typical wood-framed houses, touted as rust-proof, decay-proof, insect and rodent-proof, and fireproof, and coordinating 1- and 2-car garages were also available. However, despite the interest in Lustron houses, the company ultimately filed for bankruptcy in June 1950, with the last house shipped out on June 6, 1950. Well, the company failed to reach its production goal of 30,000 houses per year in its brief existence between 1946 and 1950. The company ultimately produced 2,680 houses. As of 2009, only about 1,500 Lustron houses remain in existence in 36 states, many with additions and alterations, and some have been dismantled and relocated. Originally constructed in 1949 and 1950 at 125 Elm Street in Westfield, Chautauqua County, the house and garage were painstakingly dismantled and reconstructed in their current location between 2016 and 2020. The Lustron Westchester Deluxe 2-bedroom house with the model and serial number of M02 number 01310 was first erected in Westfield by Frank J. Berry in 1949. Berry was the general traffic manager for Welch's Grape Juice Company. He and his wife Dorothy lived in the house until the mid to late 1950s. After changing hands many times, the house was put up for sale in 2015. Failing to sell for over a year, the house was threatened with alteration or even demolition. It was purchased by the current owners in 2016, and using an original construction manual as a guide, in reverse, the house and garage were meticulously disassembled, repaired, cleaned, shipped, and reassembled to their current location in Eden. The period of significance for the Lustron house and garage encompasses its original manufacturing and construction date of 1949 to 1950. Lustron House Westchester Deluxe Model M02 number 01310 also meets the registration requirements for nomination under the Lustron Houses of New York Multiple Property Documentation Form, which was prepared in 2007. Located in New York State, the house meets the geographical requirements of this MPDF and is identified as the last entry in the chart on Section G, page 5, which identified the house and garage in its original location at 125 Elm Street. The house retains all critical components outlined in the registration requirements, including the integrity of massing, the steel wall and roof panels, integrity to the interior plan, materials and built-in components, aluminum windows, and concrete foundation. There are no additions made to the building, and the basement is not readily visible from the other vantage points. The MPDF notes that the presence of a full basement does not render a property ineligible, provided it is otherwise highly intact, which this example is. We'll go through some photos in a minute. So the MPDF does not make any reference to relocated properties. However, given the high level of integrity of the historic fabric and the fact that the building was relocated within New York State, the Lustron House continues to meet the registration requirements. So we'll just kind of take a little tour around here. You can see that surf blue. So I did a comparison here of some advertising and marketing photos compared to what it is now. I mean, you can see it's, with the exception of maybe the dog, it's remarkably intact. It's literally a little museum. So all the built-ins are intact. So I believe the owner, Joyce Sheets, is attending remotely, and she wanted me to convey that she is so happy to be the caretaker of this special house and that it is a thrill to be able to live in this piece of history. So this is Lustron House Westchester Deluxe Model M02, number 01310. Are there any questions?
Reviewed one, I think, from Schenectady a few years ago. Was that the only other one that's gone through the board review?
There's a handful of them, and there's a small historic district in Albany, but they are pretty, I mean, they're pretty rare across the country, and it's pretty rare that they're intact enough to be eligible for the register.
Comment. Fundamentally, these Lustron houses consist of a kit of parts. And that kit of parts, its manufacturing process of all the Lustron homes, with its emphasis on producing each piece one at a time, that underscores how the kit of parts is very well suited to the disassembly, moving, and reconstructing the home. And I also think that we should compliment those who undertook with such great care the dismantling and the reconstructing of the house.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The owner actually kept a blog. I mean, she sent me way more photos than I could send. Put in the nominee. I mean, every piece was numbered. There were charts. It was literally a very painstaking disassembly and reassembly. But yes, the Lustron houses, there are others, I think, in Virginia that have been dismantled, moved. I mean, they're sort of fundamentally made to do that. So.
And I really want to compliment Joyce, I guess, as well as this nomination, because the visual documentation showing, even though we didn't get all of it, what we got really helped understand the dismantling. So I really appreciate you, Joyce, for that documentation and for having this as part of the nomination.
Sounds like maybe at one time she worked for IKEA.
All right, we have a motion to approve from Jay. Do I hear a second? Second from
Second.
Carol. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Suffolk County? All right, your call is up next.
Okay, so this nomination was actually prepared by Bill Krattinger. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, so I am taking it across the finish line. So this is York Hall. York Hall is a colonial revival style theater located on the grounds of the former Kings Park Psychiatric Center in Kings Park, Suffolk County. It is a keynote feature of the former Psychiatric Center and is now located within the bounds of the Nisqually River State Park, which was formed from lands once associated with the now defunct mental health facility. It is being nominated to the state and national registers in association with Criterion A in the area of social history for its longstanding use for a wide range of both hospital and community functions, and under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of institutional theater design rendered in the colonial revival style. The period of significance begins in 1932 with the construction of the building and terminates in 1973 with the current 50-year mark, given the building's continued use as an active community space until the Psychiatric Center's closure in the mid-1990s. York Hall was a component of the Kings Park Psychiatric Center, I'll refer to it as KPPC from here on out, campus, which was established in the mid-1880s by the Kings County Legislature to address overcrowding at its existing Kings County asylums in Flatbush. York Hall was dedicated in May 1932 and was named in honor of Monsieur John C. York, a Catholic reverend and respected figure at the hospital, and additionally an important force in securing funding for the building's construction. The campus continued to grow and ultimately reached the height of its physical development and patient population in the mid-20th century, but ultimately ceased operations in 1996. The former campus had previously been determined eligible. However, after substantial building loss and contemporary development, the overall physical integrity of the campus has been eroded. Subsequent survey and reevaluation of the campus led to two individually eligible buildings, York Hall and Building 93, along with a smaller eligible historic district containing the Veterans Memorial Hospital unit in the northeast section of the campus. The building was conceived to function as a flexible, mixed-use space that could accommodate a wide range of hospital and community activities. Among these were theatrical productions, movies, hospital social functions like holiday dinners and religious services, and even sporting events like full-court basketball. Much as York had conceived it, the building quickly assumed a central role in the lives of KPPC hospital patients and staff. In time, the surrounding Kings Park hamlet grew up alongside the hospital, with many of the residents employed in various capacities on the campus. Soon, community events such as graduations, dances, and fundraisers were also conducted at York Hall. These events and shared social interactions between the community and the hospital created an inseparable bond between the two. York Hall was erected to the plans of the State Architect's Office, then headed by architect William E. Haggard. Architecturally, the building reflects the campus's stylistic preferences from the 1920s and 30s, during which time red brick buildings of colonial revival design were the prevailing stylistic type. While deterioration of the finishes has resulted from water penetration, the basic spatial premise of the interior remains intact, as do numerous historic period features. Rehabilitation efforts are currently underway at York Hall, spearheaded by the Nisqually River State Park Foundation. A comprehensive rehabilitation of the slate shingle roof was the first phase, during which deteriorated wood decking and copper flashing that had been removed illegally were replaced in kind. This is the first step towards placing the building back in contemporary use as a theater venue, the rehabilitation of which will be leveraged using state and federal commercial tax credits. York Hall remains a building of exceptional significance to the former hospital campus and the outlying Kings Park community. Its construction formed an important episode in the history of the institution, as it quickly came to assume a central role in the lives of staff and patient populations, while also affording numerous social opportunities to the outlying community. Few, if any, extent Kings Park Psychiatric Center buildings more aptly and effectively portray this bond between the two. It remains largely as designed and built, and active measures are currently being implemented to address the building's deterioration in more recent times. So we have one letter of support from the town of Smithton, and that's York Hall. Any questions?
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Chelsea, for the great presentation. Look, this one is near and dear to our heart, and there's another element to it I think I should all make you aware. This is all part of the Nisqually State Park. There were at one point 94 buildings on this campus, the old Kings Park Psychiatric Center. I don't know if you've all been there, Carol, you probably have. I first visited in 2008, this time of year, fog rolling in off the sound, no one's there. It is a set for a horror movie. Literally, if you go on YouTube, there are amateur movies that have been filmed there, and that's part of the problem, is that we have a tough time keeping people vandals from getting in these buildings that have asbestos still, broken glass. It's a dangerous thing, and it's a minor miracle that no one's been hurt there yet. We've had to bring down some of these buildings, including a bowling alley, where the bowling shoes and bowling balls were left behind. You go in and they were still there. So this is the perfect situation, I think, where the policy and the politics are really intersecting, in that we get to preserve this majestic building, but also we reclaim this building. And this is one we don't have to worry about from a public safety standpoint. So I think your vote also is going to have a duality to it. And I really want to endorse all the efforts being put here. And we're getting private money as well. So it's really ticking all the boxes.
deterioration happened before it became a state park and after it was decommissioned as whatever it was?
This is, you're going to poke the tiger in the eye. It was handed over to state parks in the 90s, and state parks, I'm comfortable saying on the record, had no capacity to manage this property, not only from a policing aspect, from a preservation aspect. 90 some odd buildings, including high rises, greenhouses, homes, detached homes, dormitories, all of which were deteriorating rapidly and also being infiltrated by vandals on a regular basis. I was there just last fall, and in the middle of the day, we saw a guy on the roof. Had to call the police. Middle of the day, park day. So it is a problem, but obviously there's also historical significance to this. And so bringing it down, not only would that be a shame from a historical preservation perspective, it's also financially impractical. We could blow out the entire state budget just on Kings Park. So this is the Lord's work we're doing here in preserving this one building. It's a beachhead. Maybe there are others to follow that we can preserve, maybe not, but at least this one, we don't have to worry about anyone hurting themselves. And we get a great building out of it.
But the reason that parks got it was that there's also frontage on the sound and open space and so forth. So, I mean, it wasn't just being dumped by another agency on a reluctant state parks, right?
It was. I mean, it's a beautiful spot, and of course, we don't want that developed, but to put it immediately, to skip all the pieces on the monopoly board and immediately give it to state parks without any preservation or the money to reclaim these buildings, in my opinion, was an F-. And that really had burdened the Long Island State Parks region still, where this is a lot of money and again, I touch wood, everyone, a miracle no one's been hurt there yet. It's a miracle. We have buildings that are 20 stories high, people in the top with asbestos, open asbestos. It's a miracle. And so, but I think we're pushing our luck, right? So, but again, point taken, rather this than condos, point taken, but there were other intermediate steps. I'm looking at Carol, other intermediate steps one could have taken to ameliorated the process, and they weren't.
I'll just add one fact, which since 1960, there are nearly as many buildings that have been demolished at this park, 57, as remain present, 60 buildings. That's straight from the nomination. The context in a way.
Context and that information. Your call. Do I hear a motion to approve? Brian, do I have a second?
A second.
Wint is a second. All in favor? Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, moving to Rochester.
Good morning. Today I have two nominations to present, both in Monroe County, and both were drafted by the Landmark Society of Western New York. The first nomination is the Todd Union Building on the University of Rochester's River Campus. I jumping the gun there. Todd Union is a Georgian Revival-style building located at the southern end of the fraternity quadrangle on the northwest edge of the U of R campus. Built in 1930, it was named for businessman George W. Todd, who was instrumental in the university moving to its present Riverside location, and who insisted that the new campus have a dedicated space or place for student activities, dining, and other amenities, such as a post office. At this time, the building is being nominated solely under Criterion A in the area of social history for its role in LGBTQ history, the Rochester Gay Liberation Front, and for being the initial site of the GLF office and events. The period of significance is 1970 to 1976, when the office was in Todd Union. The context for the gay liberation movement is well documented in the nomination. Just to briefly recap, the movement dates to the period immediately following Stonewall, when a more militant type of activism became of age in the civil rights era, aligning with other counterculture movements of the time, such as radical feminism and Black Power. The Rochester GLF was founded at the University of Rochester by two students, Larry Fine, who took out an anonymous advertisement in the May 8, 1970 publication of the Campus Times, seen in the upper image, and PhD candidate Bob Osborne, who was the organizing force behind the Rochester GLF. Osborne and Fine only expected a few people to show up for their first meeting in December 1970, but approximately 100 attended. Soon after, the GLF successfully petitioned the U of R Student Activities Office for official recognition. The group was given an office in Todd Union, a small, unpretentious second-floor room known as 202D. And this image looks towards room 202D in the background, the former GLF room, which now looks to be used for storage. When used by the GLF, it had a library and a hotline set up for questions and counseling for those struggling with sexual identity. First and foremost, room 202D served as a resource center. For the Rochester GLF, Todd Union's central location was the perfect place for students to meet, explore their interest, and extend their knowledge beyond the classroom. Seen here is a former music room on the main floor that was used for some GLF functions, including liberation dances and events from the GLF Speakers Bureau. The Rochester GLF expanded their outreach beyond Todd Union, with members doing presentations elsewhere on campus and at nearby colleges, such as SUNY Brockport, and in the local community. Communications were vital, and the GLF began publishing and distributing a newspaper known as the Empty Closet to publicize GLF events, national and campus news, and to provide a venue for student articles, essays, and poetry. Members also appeared on local TV and radio shows, but it's not clear if any broadcasts were done from the campus radio station seen in the background of this image. This is the basement of Todd Union, and you can see that they still have their post office there. The nomination includes some brief architectural history of the building, which retains a fair amount of historic features, including the main lounge on the ground floor with its dedicatory inscription to George Todd, seen here. The purpose of this nomination is to document Todd Union's connection to the larger LGBTQ community's history and the beginning of the Rochester GLF. Questions or comments?
Is criterion A only?
Yes.
It is. Thank you. To approve. Carol, do I have a second? Ryan, second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Oak Hill Country Club in Pittsford, Monroe County. Let me begin by stating that there wouldn't have been a Todd Union if the Oak Hill Country Club hadn't moved to Pittsford and sold their riverside lands to the University of Rochester. It's interesting how some things have connections. With that said, the Oak Hill Country Club is significant under Criterion C in the area of landscape architecture for its east and west courses designed in 1924 and its historic clubhouse constructed at the same time. This is a wonderful view of the east course's hole number 1, and to the right you can just make out an American flag showing the location of the Hill of Fame, created in 1956 to honor those who made significant contributions to the game of golf. Some of the honorees include Babe Didrikson, Ben Hogan, Bob Hope, and Oak Hill member and pro golfer Jeff Schluman. Oak Hill is significant for having 2 courses designed by Donald Ross, seen here on the right, and on the left chatting with a caddy. Ross was one of the people who pretty much created the profession of the golf course architect. By the time he died in 1948, he designed courses for over 400 country clubs in North America, including the 2 for Oak Hill, and prior to that, the course for the Country Club of Buffalo's Williamsville course in 1926, the Bellevue Country Club in Syracuse in 1914, and the Mark Twain Golf Course in Elmira in 1940. With over 350 acres and a growing membership, Ross and Oak Hill had enough space for 2 courses that would greatly expedite play for the members. Ross was brought to Pittsford to view the site, and after doing so, he quickly sketched out the courses. According to Oak Hill's history, the club hired him on the spot, and he provided them with the East Course, seen in green, and the West Course, seen in yellow. It's the West Course that is highly intact to the Ross design, and the East Course that went through a restoration in 2019. Ross stated that one of the best shapes for laying out a course was that of a fan, and that the clubhouse be located at the base, with hole number 1 and 18 located nearest to the building. The Oak Hill clubhouse was centrally located between the 2 courses, and this aerial view looks towards the west course. The Tudor Revival style building was one of the first commissions for the newly formed architectural firm of Thompson, Holmes, and Converse that had offices in New York City and Rochester. As stated in the nomination, Tudor Revival was popular for residences at the time, and the firm adapted the form to provide all needed amenities for members, dining room, meeting rooms, lockers, etc., in a mansion-like setting. Both the clubhouse and the courses were completed in 1926, and during construction, members were allowed to play on the old course grounds, which is now the U of R River campus. The building was designed with terraces providing views of the courses. The main entrance was through a grand Tudor arch that entered into the main hallway. Having a little trouble turning my pages here. You can see its highly polished wood floors, wood staircase, and moldings. Here we see the richly detailed ballroom, which retains wood paneling, Tudor fireplace, and the original tall leaded glass windows. When additions were made to the building, the Tudor Revival theme was continued. Here we're looking at the grill room, which was added in the 1990s. Oak Hill also honors its long history with displays of photos, artifacts, and other memorabilia in its history hall in the main clubhouse. Oak Hill became the site of numerous championships, including the U.S. Men's and Women's Opens, but to keep competitive for national and international opens, the East Course was altered in the 1950s by another golf legend, Robert Trent Jones. Additional alterations were made in the 1970s, and in 2019, the members formed a restoration committee and hired Andrew Green, who is known for his restoration work of Donald Ross courses. The nomination includes a brief discussion of each of the East Course holes, changes made by Jones, and Green's restoration work using Ross's notes. The East Course also has a number of non-historic features that include a circa 1994 stone bridge at hole number 1, seen here, another stone bridge, and a 1932 New York State marker near hole 10. The marker is considered non-contributing as it post-dates the period of significance of 1924 to 1926. The dates for the period of significance were determined after a discussion with the National Park Service. Here we see West Course's hole number 9. Ross was known for using natural contours of the terrain that allowed him to design uphill and downhill tees and greens and sloping fairways. He was also known for use of hummocks as bunkers behind greens to keep them sand-free. This is a view of the West Course looking south across holes 16 and 17. And this image, I think, is one of the best. It's hole number 13 on the west course, which really gives you a sense of the terrain. Oak Hill added several non-historic amenities, such as the snack bar near the end of the west course, but made it compatible with the clubhouse seen in the background. In 2022, Oak Hill also added guest cottages on the north side of the property, also following the Tudor Revival style. And here's another compatible structure, this being the information building, also built in 2022. If you veer to the left, you end up at the clubhouse, and veering right takes you to the west parking lot. Not being a golfer myself, the nomination for Oak Hill made me appreciate the role of the club and the role of club and Rochester, how they play, how they continue to contribute to the world of golf. And as Oak Hill continues to grow in membership and reputation, I'd like to end with the words of Donald Ross. These are my standards to laying out a golf course. Make each hole present a different problem. So arrange it so that every stroke must be made with the full concentration and attention necessary to good golf. Build each hole in a manner that wastes none of the ground at my disposal and takes advantage of every opportunity I can see. The ideal course is one that presents a test of golf for the everyday golfer and the first-class golfer. In my humble opinion, this nomination clearly illustrates how Oak Hill has embraced Ross's words and legacy. Questions and comments?
You referred to the National Park Service limiting the period of significance, and one of the questions that I have in reading this nomination and hearing the presentation, is there ever any consideration given to criterion A? I mean, it's such a historic course, it has its own golf museum, and also, is there ever been a consideration of a national level of significance to something like this?
That still needs to be determined, because clearly it has local significance, it may have state significance. They have been doing national opens. As a matter of fact, the U.S., I believe it's the U.S. Men's Open, is going to take place in May of this year at Oak Hill, which is why we're putting forward this nomination. They had requested that we do they be considered for listing on the National Register. I did talk with a person at the National Park Service about the criteria and about the period of significance. My question was, why don't we do it into the 50s with Robert Trent Jones? But he pointed out to me that since this is Donald Ross and they were going back to the Donald Ross, that's where it should be. So we're limiting it to landscape architecture for Donald Ross and his significance, and also for the construction of the clubhouse. Okay.
I've played golf, not many times and not very well. And in the photos that I've seen in this presentation, I don't see many places that aren't sloping. So where's my ball going to stop rolling?
You might want the west course.
The west course, right? I mean, for pros and first timers alike, I don't know about that. Bring a lot of balls.
Yeah, to maintain championship play, they had to move the tees back on the east course. So,
other questions or comments about Oak Hill? Do I hear a motion? I'll move it. How about a second? Jennifer, a second. All in favor? Any abstained or opposed?
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I have two nominations this afternoon, both in Oneida County. This is the First Church of Christ Scientist, now the Oneida County History Center, and it's located in the city of Utica, Oneida County. The property is being nominated under criterion C for architecture,
as a highly intact example of classical revival style. This appearance reflects the progressive democratic ideals and metaphysical rationality of the Christian Science movement at the turn of the 20th century. The building adheres to the prescribed use of symmetry and is nearly monochromatic with austere terracotta trim. Classical details, including the stylized acanthus leaves adorning the roof, could be reproduced in molds and resisted weathering better than stone. The cornerstone was laid in 1914, and the church opened for services in the spring of 1915. The church is composed of three main sections: the two-story entrance foyer fronted by the full-height Ionic portico, the square plan main block housing the auditorium, and a lower three-story rear block that once housed the large pipe organ, two reading rooms, and utility spaces. The pipe organ was removed when the building was acquired by the Oneida County History Center, and some of the rooms were repurposed for offices. The building retains most of its original interior plan and decorative finishes, including stylized pilasters and classical molding. The decorative scheme of the first church is restrained and non-figurative, presenting no traditional Christian iconography. The interior layout was dictated by the Christian Science practices, which emphasized teaching led by readers. The auditorium was the central location for large meetings, with music being provided by the large pipe organ. Smaller spaces on the lower level were for more intimate gatherings. The distinct Roman lattice, the pattern of squares with the diagonal lines passing through the squares, which creates the X, is the only other motif repeated throughout the building. It's used for the pale green and gold-stained glass windows manufactured by Spence Bell and Company of Boston in the auditorium and foyer. And it is again repeated in windows, transoms, and sidelights throughout the building. The wood organ screen and the balcony parapet also use this same design. And this is the First Church of Christ Scientist. Any questions? Oh,
The Oneida County Historical Society, I think, is based in Rome, isn't it? They have a wonderful facility there and a magnificent collection. So this must be just a Utica branch or Utica representative of a larger collection in another city.
well, there's two different historical societies. So yes, you're correct. There is a historical society in Rome, and that's the Rome Historical Society. And then this is the Oneida County Historical Society, or History Center, as they call themselves now. So there's two different ones. I also have some prepared remarks from the executive director of the Oneida County History Center, Rebecca McLean. To the members of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation, thank you for considering the nomination of the First Church of Christ Scientists in Utica, New York. Oneida County History Center is the current owner of the property and fully supports its inclusion on the state and national register of historic places. Listing this beautiful and historic property would benefit our organization, our community, and our state. This listing would acknowledge the building's architectural significance and highlight our community's rich cultural heritage. This property is already located in the city of Utica's scenic and historic district. And inclusion on the state and national register would amplify this distinction. The History Center strives to protect and preserve the past of Oneida County and hopes that this nomination will encourage historic preservation throughout our community. We strongly urge you to vote in favor of including the First Church of Christ Scientists on the state and national register. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Comments about First Church of Christ Scientists? Or a motion to approve?
This is Kristen. I can move to approve.
Do I hear a second? Eric Krieger seconds. All in favor? Any abstained or opposed? Great. Motion carries. And moving on to the beaches.
A little touchy. This is the Beaches Historic District, which is located in the residential outskirts west of the city of Rome in Oneida County. The property is a 51-acre estate that evolved from an early 20th century single-family residence with outbuildings to a popular and enduring mid-20th century restaurant resort of the same name. The estate buildings on the property are significant under Criterion C for architecture as exceptional examples of the Tudor Revival style designed by Griffin and Wynkoop of New York City and Harry Sternfeld of Philadelphia. The historic district is also significant under Criterion A in the area of commerce for its contributions to the economic history of Rome in the second half of the 20th century, and for its illustration of the successful commercial enterprise of the Destito family, who had been restaurateurs in the city of Rome since 1908. The Destitos purchased the estate called the Beaches in 1949, developing it into a regionally significant restaurant and resort. The period of significance begins with the construction of the first estate building in 1916 and ends in 1960, when the last addition was added to the Beaches restaurant. The historic district includes 6 buildings from the original estate, the north and south lodges at each of the entrances, the residence and garage, and the residence becomes the restaurant, the pool complex, and a potting shed. The potting shed is just to the right of the south lodge, in between the south lodge and the motel. These all compose the original estate that was constructed between 1916 and 1925. The motel and then the additions to the residence to make the restaurant were constructed in the 1950s and 1960s. The landscape of the property is also a contributing element, with a broad, sloping, open lawn divided by a creek-fed man-made ponds, which are between the lawn and the motel, a winding drive that connects the north and south entrances, and woodlands that surround the property. Non-contributing buildings in the middle on the property were constructed after the period of significance. Dr. Frank Potter moved to Rome from Syracuse in 1905 to become the vice president and chief engineer for the Wire and Telegraph Company of America. In 1916, he hired Percy Griffin and John Wynkoop to design buildings that would showcase his dream of a country estate outside the growing city of Rome. The vernacular of the humble cottage style may have suited Potter's desire to include a working farm on his estate. Griffin and Wynkoop designed the 2 lodges at the entrances of the estate, the large picture to the left and the one up in the upper right. Those are the lodges, as picturesque rural residences. Sternfeld continued this style with the larger main residence, garage, and pool complex, and other structures on the estate. The commission likely dictated that new buildings match the Tudor revival of the lodges, and later comments by Sternfeld minimized his role in the estate's design. In the lower right-hand is the potting shed, and in the middle right is the main residence. The main residence had a modest amount of living space for a wealthy family of 5 and support staff, and was consistent with the layout of a Tudor Revival home. The family's living space on the ground floor included a living room, library, dining room, and breakfast room. Space on the upper floor was constrained by the steep pitch of the roof, so the design featured a long hallway lined with under-the-eaves storage on one side and bedrooms and bathrooms on the other. The layout veered into excess by the inclusion of a minstrel's gallery, which you see in the left,
a portion of the upstairs hall that overlooked the high-ceilinged living room below. And that's the middle. And the use of the painted wood ceilings in the living room and in some of the bedrooms. The finishes and fixtures of the interior incorporated a variety of materials: wood, plaster, stone, paint, wrought iron, tile, in highly personal decorative motifs. Spanish-style wall tiles, Gothic wrought iron fixtures combined to form a surprisingly ornate and eclectic interior. The pool complex is the least Tudor of the original estate buildings, displaying more Italian Renaissance features. The building was designed to match the material and theme of the estate, but with some Gothic touches, including the arched terrace and screened windows. The Neptune fountain, which you see to the right, was sculpted and signed by Gaetano Cesare, a noted early 20th century sculptor from New York City, reinforcing the Italian Renaissance eclecticism of this complex. The Destita family purchased the Beaches estate in 1949 after the success of their family restaurant in downtown Rome called Savoy. The addition of the estate would provide larger banquet space for events and weddings. By adding overnight accommodations and activities such as golf and swimming, they expanded the appeal of the Beaches by attracting regional guests, taking advantage of shortage of accommodations created by the growth of local industry and the new Griffiths Air Force Base in Rome, as well as their proximity to the recently completed New York State Thruway. Combined with the boom in post-World War II tourism, the resort saw success and was popular locally into the 21st century. Even though the commercial use of the property was centered on the estate house, the most significant architectural addition to the property was the construction of a 40-room motel in 1955 called the Paul Revere Motor Hotel. Later called Inn at the Beaches, this building was expanded in 1959 and is significant as an excellent example of colonial revival architecture. The full width and full height colonnaded porches showcase the style that referenced Mount Vernon and was particularly popular in the mid-20th century. Motor hotels or motels were a newer form of architecture, but were instantly familiar when constructed in the popular colonial revival style. The Destitos embraced the historic motif even further by equipping the rooms with early American-style furnishings and arranging to have the motel's phone number be 1777. The name of the motel was probably a nod to the one of the most important local industries in the mid-20th century, Revere copper. And this is the Beaches Historic District. I have 4 letters of support from the Mayor of Rome, from the Destito family, from Assemblywoman Butenschone, and Senator Griffo. This is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1. Any questions?
Family of Assemblywoman Destito, she probably, with respect to the process, withheld her comments, but
Maybe.
she's a good friend of historic preservation.
With the story about the statue?
I am.
Would you tell?
Yeah. It's a little bit of an interesting story because there's a statue in the front. I didn't have a great picture of the statue, but it's it's called the Capitoline statue. It's the wolf with the feeding Romulus and Remus, and this was gifted to Rome, the city of Rome, but the city of Rome didn't want to put it in the city.
To the city of Rome from Rome, Italy?
Exactly.
In exchange for a snowplow?
Yes. Yeah, there's a little bit of that too, of in exchange. So the city of Rome didn't want to put it in a prominent place because they felt it was a little
Yeah, too pagan. So the Destito family said, we will take it, and they put it out in front of the restaurant, and it's still there, and they plan on keeping it there too. Hmm. Oh yes, because this is a really wonderful project too. It's the current owner is Nascentia Health, and they plan on turning this into senior housing. So they plan on turning the motel into the senior apartments, and then the main residence restaurant will be a community space with dining. And yeah, it's a wonderful reuse of the property. And it'll be really nice senior housing.
Comments? I'd like to make a motion to approve it. Do we have a second? Vint? All in favor? Any abstained or opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Moving to Temple Israel, New York City.
Good afternoon. So I've got a few religious buildings for you and then a fun discussion. So great day. We're going to start here with Temple Israel of the City of New York, now Young Israel of the West Side. It's being nominated under Criterion A in the area of ethnic heritage for Jewish history for its association with the intra-city migration of Jewish populations leaving Harlem for other neighborhoods in Manhattan in the 1920s. Originally founded in 1870 as Congregation Hand in Hand, the organization changed its name to Temple Israel Harlem after it purchased a building in 1888, and they constructed this building in Harlem in 1905. It was commissioned, German-Jewish architect Arnold Brunner designed that. And the congregation was happy there, but in response to a general increase in New York City's population, in the early 20th century, demographic shifts, the congregation sold this building in 1920 to relocate to the Upper West Side, which became the center of the middle and upper middle class Jewish community at the time. As part of that relocation, the congregation renamed itself Temple Israel of the City of New York, and this is the building we are nominating today. It's additionally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its design by architect William Takow. Designed in the classical revival style, commonly used by institutions during the period, the building is also an example of the synagogue center building type. Synagogue centers originated during the late 19th century, were very common by the 1920s, and featured a sanctuary space as well as an attached community center. There's just coming a little bit inside, seeing the hallway and a few of those features. It's interesting, Takow had not previously designed a synagogue before, and so he really leans on Brunner's design and models the interior plan and design closely after the Brunner Synagogue, even using a very similar style of stained glass. And after he does this, he like writes an article and he's like, look, I'm this great synagogue designer. He never designs another synagogue again, but, you know, architects. Temple Israel used this space until 1962 when they moved to another building. They still exist, and it's a very modern, brutalist building, so maybe someday we'll see that. And they sold this to Young Israel of the West Side at that time. The period of significance in the nomination currently is only the date of construction. The student who worked on this draft is doing a little more research, and maybe we will expand that to include the full history of the congregation's time in this space. So we are working on that. So that is Temple Israel, the City of New York. It was a Columbia student draft done in partnership with Sacred Sites, and we have a letter of support from New York City LPC. Are there any questions on this one?
I had a comment. It's Carol. I know this building. I lived in that neighborhood for a dozen years, and I've been in the interior, which is it comes across in the slides, but when you're in the building, it's really exquisite. And it's interesting that Takow only did one synagogue, because he certainly did the one that he did quite well. So moved.
Hi. All right, we're going to move north to Westminster Presbyterian Church, now Messiah Baptist Church, which is locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a robust example of a late 19th century Gothic Revival Protestant auditorium church. Founded in 1858, the congregation and its Sunday school had grown substantially by the late 1870s. I'm going to point out before I move to the next slide that this photo is maybe 6 or 7 years old. This is currently the way it is. The congregation is working on it, but I wanted you to have at least one unobstructed image of the building. So the building was designed by New York City church architect Lawrence B. Volk in 1880. And the church had to be rebuilt just 5 years after its 1881 opening due to a devastating fire. They had all those plans. They went back to his original design. They added a new mezzanine on the inside, a big new organ, and a new cast iron roof, and it's been working well ever since. The building includes a rear Sunday school wing centered upon a lecture hall using an Akron plan classroom design with 2 levels. And those spaces were critically important for the congregation, which had originated as a mission Sunday school in Yonkers. So the congregation continued to operate from this building until 1964, when it merged with another local Presbyterian congregation. And then the church enters its second phase of history, which is perhaps even more interesting, I find. The church is locally significant under criterion A in the areas of ethnic history, Black, and social history, civil rights, for its association with the Messiah Baptist congregation since 1965. Messiah Baptist Church is the oldest Black congregation in Westchester County and has played a central role in both the Yonkers and Westchester County Black communities since 1875. Messiah Baptist moved into its original building in 1888 and had grown quickly, and the history in the nomination is very interesting, sort of the history of them leading up to this point. After purchasing this building, the congregation made it a focal point for the civil rights movement in the region, and the additional space was really helpful for them. On May 28, 1965, the Negro American Labor Council organized a rally at the church featuring speeches by Dr. Martin Luther King, A. Philip Randolph of the Negro American Labor Council, and James Farmer of the Congress of Racial Equality. The period of significance for the church extends to 1990 to reflect the prolonged struggle for civil rights in Yonkers as the city continued to notoriously flaunt federal desegregation policy. Under the leadership of Reverend Darrell George, Messiah Baptist Church played a central role in the fight to desegregate the city's public housing. The church was directly involved in numerous marches and protests, including the largest civil rights protests in the city's history. These efforts organized a national coalition of civil rights activists to pressure the city government into compliance with federal court-ordered housing integration. While the lawsuit and battle extended over decades, the church helped catalyze renewed attention to the issues of public housing, housing segregation, and the continued need for civil rights activism during the late 20th century. And that is Westminster Presbyterian / Messiah Baptist. This is another Columbia student draft brought to us in partnership with Sacred Sites. Are there any questions on this one?
Interesting evolution of history and pretty exciting about this last phase. I hope it continues strong.
We have a text from Gretchen Soren, a State Review Board member, and she wants to add demographic population shifts, a euphemism that historians would call white flight.
Referring to Temple Israel? Yes, and the nomination gets into that in more detail.
Other questions or comments? Motion?
I would make a motion. Eric
Krieger, do I have a second?
Kristen?
Kristen Heron, all in favor? Any abstained or opposed? Seeing none, motion carries unanimous.
And for anyone who's interested in Yonkers, if they're not familiar with the housing issues there, there's books, there's a new television series that came out a few years ago, all about this. It's a very interesting, very rich history there. Right, and back to Brooklyn for English Evangelical Lutheran Church of the Reformation, also known as English Lutheran Church. Significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a highly intact example of the English Gothic Revival style. Designed by New York architects Bannister and Schell, who specialized in ecclesiastic buildings. It's also significant under criterion A in the area of ethnic history, European German, as one of the earliest Lutheran churches in Brooklyn to offer English worship services to families of German ancestry. Oh, that's the one I want. By the mid-19th century, East New York, a community in Brooklyn, had become a hub for German Lutheran immigrants. The German Lutheran Missionary Society established St. John's Evangelical Church, the first German Lutheran church in East New York in 1847. If that sounds or this looks a little familiar, I brought this to you in 2019 to focus on the history of that community and that church. The worship services, Sunday school, and confirmation classes were all held in the German language, and that was so important for this community at the time that church was founded. But by the late 19th century, the community is changing, and congregants are beginning to advocate for English language services to meet the needs of new generations. Frederick Bischoff, the owner of a cocoa and chocolate manufacturing company, helped lead that effort after noticing that students in confirmation classes, including his own son, were struggling with language barriers. And so he and other leaders in the church went to the St. John's Council and asked for English language services or an English language associate pastor. And those requests were rejected. So he went to the synod and they got permission to establish a new English-speaking church. This congregation formed in 1898 with 13 members and grew quickly, reaching 185 families in 1901 and a Sunday school attendance of 500 to 600 students, which really says how much of this is that push in these new generations and strengthening that community. The nominated church building was constructed in 1908 and 9 to meet the needs of the growing organization. And I find it interesting that with St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, it's being designed in this high Victorian Gothic with these German elements. They hire a Brooklyn architect of German ancestry. For the English Lutheran Church, they go for a prominent New York firm, and they have it designed in the English Gothic style. So there's some play in some preferences and tastes and style over time, but they're also appearing to make a deliberate choice in line with who they say they want to be as a new congregation. The original congregation remained active until 2014, and fellow Lutheran churches in Brooklyn have celebrated this church really as a turning point in the history of Lutheranism in the region for its precedent of providing an English language service. This was a student draft, though not from Columbia, again in partnership with Sacred Sites, and we do have a letter of support from New York City LPC.
Questions or comments from the board?
Just have one question. So in these last three, these particular instances, what was the motivation for congregations to go for listing? I realize the last two worked with Sacred Sites. What was kind of the impetus to do this?
So actually, all three of these are Sacred Sites. And so to be able to get Sacred Sites funding, I believe eligibility is often a first place, but really getting that listing is very important to be able to get those grants. And that Sacred Sites grant money can be so valuable for congregations like these. So what happens is congregations reach out to Ann Friedman at Sacred Sites. She talks to Andrew Dolkart. She reaches out to our office. She gets these eligibilities down. And once there's a student who's interested or available, she tries to move these forward. And so it's a learning process for the student. It's good for them. It helps the churches. And, we get to tell some different stories that maybe we weren't expecting when you get Westminster Presbyterian Church. Suddenly we're talking about the 90s. So it works out well when it works well.
One of the few sources of money for these congregations to invest in.
Absolutely. There are so few places for religious buildings to get grant money. And Sacred Sites is only for buildings with active congregations.
Is it unusual to have a student consultant as far away as Texas do something like this for us?
Yes, that was a bit unusual. So that's for English Evangelical. This one had started out with a different staff member at the Landmarks Conservancy. It sort of got dropped. And Vaskin reached out to me just sort of independently. I said, hey, I've got this project floating out here. And he took it and he ran with it and he got it done. So it was great to have that different source of a student project come in.
Questions or comments or a motion?
I'm happy to move it. I'm happy to second.
All right, Lynn first. Kay second. All in favor? Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, so this one is a little bit less standard, so you're going to all need to put on your thinking caps. We don't get move requests very often. It's been a few years, so I'm going to talk you through this one, and I hope we'll have you all will have a good discussion on how you want to handle it. So this is the Columbia Turnpike East Toll House, which was individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. The circa 1835 toll house, which is located on the north side of State Route 23 in the town of Hillsdale, is the only surviving wood frame toll house extant on the route and a rare example of this building type. The building's south elevation fronts immediately onto the state route, which is a circumstance of its former role as the easternmost toll house and gate for the former Columbia Turnpike, an overland route between western Massachusetts and the Hudson River at Hudson, New York, between 1799 and 1906. When the toll gate was in operation, the road was just one lane wide. It is currently a two-lane road which accommodates car and truck traffic. The Friends of Eastgate, which owns the building, have submitted a request to move it. Currently located not much more than a foot off of the paved road and half within the DOT right-of-way, the building is threatened by vehicle traffic and piled snow and salt in the winter. And you can see that's the parcel boundary there, so it's quite clear where the building is. When a listed building is proposed to be moved, the National Register regulations require the owner to submit documentation explaining the reason for the move, the effect on the property's historical integrity, a discussion of the setting and general environment of the proposed site, and photographs showing the proposed location. If the State Review Board votes to pre-approve the move, this request will be forwarded to the National Park Service for their pre-approval as well. If approved, the keeper would then require additional documentation after the move to confirm that the listing is maintained through this process. The National Register regulations state that properties listed in the National Register should be moved only when there is no feasible alternative for preservation. When a property is moved, every effort should be made to reestablish its historic orientation, immediate setting, and general environment. The Friends propose the building be moved 30 feet back from its current position, entirely off of the DOT right-of-way. The facade and orientation will remain in the same position relative to the roadway, and you can see that demonstrated there on the map. Due to the close relationship between the building's historic use and its significance and its location, this move request is tricky. The Friends argue that the building will retain its architectural significance as a rare survivor from the Turnpike era and its historical association with the road despite the move somewhat back from it. The Eastgate Toll House is a rare survivor from the era of early American transportation, but its precarious location is closely tied with its significance. That said, the pragmatic concerns of the Friends who want to preserve this building are very real. I appreciate the board's sensitivity and discussion in this matter. And I do have something from the Friends. Since they cannot speak to you directly, I have a statement for you. It'll take me just a little time to get through, but they wanted to sort of hit through some of these points as well. So this is from Peter Sapowski, a founding member of the Friends of Eastgate and a former town supervisor in Hillsdale. Says, thanks for the opportunity to share a few words. Bill Krattinger, a program analyst at the time, first evaluated the historic toll house in 2015, and thanks to his enthusiasm for its architectural value and historic place in state history, we acquired the building and began the process of securing it. As you know, the structure is one of the few surviving toll houses in New York State and was added to the registers in 2016. It stands on a narrow curve near the Massachusetts border on the very busy State Route 23, what was once the Columbia Turnpike. The turnpike was authorized in 1799 by the New York State Legislature for improving the road from the city of Hudson to the line of Massachusetts on the route to Hartford. Our community is very proud of the unique role the Eastgate Toll House played in the economic development of Columbia County and how it's part of the bigger historical narrative that predates the Erie Canal and the railroad. The toll house was in operation until 1907 when the county bought the rights to the turnpike. Our community has also contributed generously, helping us to successfully secure and stabilize the structure. And while it is very much the same structure that it was in the early 19th century, the turnpike is very much changed, putting the building at risk. Snow plows bearing tons of weight are only inches from the facade. Snow and salt piles onto and into the vulnerable structure. Vehicles speed by, as do enormous 16-wheeler trucks shaking the house and rattling its early windows. The toll house rests partially on Department of Transportation land. The DOT could alter the road at any time and put the toll house at further risk and most likely demolition. All this is to say that our community is very concerned and believes it should be moved away from the road. Community dollars have also funded a study to evaluate the possibility of moving the building to a safe new foundation only feet away from the current location. Our proposal, which we hope you will support, achieves 3 goals. 1, it keeps the building on the original historic site. 2, safely moves it off of DOT property and away from a dangerous state road, greatly reducing the risk of catastrophe. And 3, maintains the same 224-year-old view that passersby have of the historic toll house. We believe that shifting the structure virtually unnoticeably far surpasses the possible loss of this important structure. In closing, please know that we are grateful for the work you do and depend on an ongoing partnership with the New York State Department for Historic Preservation. Thank you. So there's a lot going on here, and I appreciate your thoughts.
Well, I'll start by saying I think the argument for this building being threatened in the location is very well made, and the remedy is actually pretty minor, in terms of the movement. Couple questions. Could you go back to the image that shows the 30-foot setback side by side?
That one?
Is that taking into account the topography? The roadside is very sloping. Is that really the elevation that the building will be at in that image on the right?
So this is what they have provided to me. I know they are paying attention to the topography. So the land slopes behind this building dramatically.
Yeah.
So they will need to create quite a bit of fill. There will be quite a bit of moving to be done.
Okay,
yes.
So
this is
the
an artist.
elevation as shown on the right is hypothetical.
It's an artist's rendering.
But it's also predicated on the understanding that they're going to build the ground up so that it maintains the sight lines.
They would have to, yes.
Okay. Now,
they understand that.
Another thing mentioned in the form and not in your presentation is the possibility of archaeology occurring here. Bard College Field School is going to work on this site this summer.
So that was one of the requirements the Park Service had, that they had to address archaeology, and that's what it says in what you read is what I understand.
So what happens if they do an archaeological project, they find the Builder's Trench, they establish criterion D as one of the National Register criteria because of intact archaeological deposits, and then you move the building off of those?
So that's part of the pre-approval, that they at least have a plan for this. One thing that I have considered is that, any building with a sloping site behind it, all of the trash is going to get thrown down the hill. So there may very well be more there than they think.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all part of having that understanding and plan in place is part of the larger project when contemplating this move.
The other thing is there's a basement in this building.
Right.
Is there going to be a basement in the new location? Is the basement going to be filled in? Is that part of the archaeological consideration? There's a lot to think about here.
Correct. And they have architects on this team. There's been a lot of drawings, and there were some speculative vision drawings for what they would like this to be that I advised them to not include in this pre-approval, because we're discussing the move and we want the Park Service to think about the move, and we don't want distractions with what a restoration plan. That's
Right.
not what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And including that could make the issue more complicated. It is already a complicated issue. If we were talking about moving a house, it's a house. This building doesn't have a reason for existing if it's not literally in the road. So the significance of the building is very tied to the location in this case, which makes it more complicated than it might be otherwise.
Still think it's a good compromise. Other comments?
Agree with you, Doug. I think it's an excellent compromise, and notwithstanding your excellent questions, I think under the circumstances, it's very sensible to support the request of the Friends. And I think the Friends, too, need to be applauded for their considerable effort and accomplishments to date with regard to the stewardship of the property.
And I don't ask those questions to poke holes in this idea. It's just so that people think about the ramifications of what's being proposed here.
I think it's nice that one of our own, Bill, is given credit for actually pointing out to the community that this is important and should be addressed. The one thing that I don't quite understand is after the move, and maybe this gets to what Jen said we shouldn't be addressing, what is the physical access for visitors or for people maintaining the building going to be? Is it going to be from below?
Well, there will be that flat land in front of it. And
So
I
it's-
think
so DOT isn't going to say, stay off the shoulder, so to speak.
right. I think there's a few different things going on that are part of this move that make it strategic. But I mean, you see over half the building is in the DOT right-of-way right now. So moving the building out of the right-of-way also makes it a safer place for the public to visit.
But of course, there is the risk that someone will drive by this and not realize it's ever been a toll house. It could just be a house by the side of it.
Mm-hmm. It will look like a house by the side of the road more than a toll house.
So we're not really thinking about this. Is there any suggestion in their plan to rebuild the actual gate?
They would like to do that.
Has anyone asked the DOT to move the road?
Look at that.
The DOT is very fine with them doing this. It was mentioned in the narrative. I realized I didn't say it in my presentation, but they have approved it with them.
There is also
No, it's threat. It's truly threat. And
It's been there since 1835.
Yeah, but the salt and the snow getting inside it, that's one of the things that concerns me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what does the form say? We're one ice storm away from this building being completely destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right.
All in favor? Any abstained or opposed?
Thank you. I
Carries.
appreciate your discussion. It's not an issue we bring to the board every meeting.
I just have one nomination, so. All right, so I have the Prospect Leopards Garden Historic District. It's situated in the heart of the Prospect Leopards Gardens neighborhood in the central part of Brooklyn, immediately east of Prospect Park. The district boundaries are generally defined by Sterling Street to the north, Lincoln Road and Rutland Road to the south, and Flatbush Avenue to the west. They extend eastward to New York Avenue from Rutland Road to Lefferts Avenue. The nominated district encompasses 780 contributing resources, 69 of which are secondary garages. There are 16 non-contributing resources. The east-west cross streets are typically residential in character, whereas many of the buildings on the north-south avenues accommodate commercial uses on the ground floor and residential uses above. The district can generally be characterized as a substantially intact urban residential neighborhood reflecting a period of development beginning in the 1890s and extending into the 1930s. Oh, wrong way. One more. Whoop, there we go. Okay. The district is eligible under criterion A in the area of community planning and development, reflecting Brooklyn's rapid development in the late 19th and early 20th century, and the organic response of a variety of developers to the demand for middle-class housing and amenities. When John Lefferts began to subdivide his ancestral estate in the 1880s, the area was ripe for development. It was adjacent to new amenities, including Prospect Park, cultural institutions, and a growing web of transportation networks. The developing area attracted families and individuals from a variety of backgrounds and ethnicities. The development of the area included distinguished but affordable rental apartments, single-family houses, and mixed-use residential and commercial buildings, which together with houses of worship, a firehouse, and other amenities served the needs of the middle-class families. Here is an 1890 map of the neighborhood with the historic district shaded in green. The nominated district is located north and east of the existing National Register listed Lefferts Manor Historic District and boundary increase. Real estate advertisements touted the benefits of both multifamily and single-family homes and apartments in the area. They typically noted the convenience of the neighborhood to Prospect Park, Brooklyn Botanical Garden, churches, schools, Ebbets Field, and to trolleys and subways with easy commutes to Manhattan. Apartments were advertised as bargains, but also as high-quality architecture and craftsmanship with modern appliances, electric lights, and heat and hot water. Always a good thing. Left-hand image is an ad from the Brooklyn Eagle. That's 1909. And on the right is a 1940s attached photo, a nice little lively scene. Early 20th century census records indicate that the neighborhood was then populated by families with a wide variety of backgrounds, including individuals born in New York, as well as others from Germany, Ireland, Italy, Poland, in addition to Yiddish-speaking families of Eastern Europe origin. Resident families almost universally had middle-class professions, including small business owners, clerks, machinists, salespeople, and civil servants. Left-hand image is a 1940s tax photo of an apartment building on Lincoln Road, and on the right, image from a brochure for 145 Lincoln Road. The district is also eligible under criterion C in the area of architecture as a collection of late 19th and early 20th century residential, commercial, religious, and civic buildings. Composed of row houses, two-family, semi-attached, and freestanding houses, apartment buildings, and institutional and commercial buildings, the district offers excellent examples of popular architectural styles of the period, including Renaissance and Romanesque Revival, Spanish Mission, Colonial Revival, Tudor Revival, and Art Deco. Many of the buildings were developed by influential Brooklyn developers and prominent Brooklyn architects. And we have a few current views of the district here, the north side of Lefferts Avenue on the left and the north side of Lincoln Road on the right. Another current view, this is looking west on Sterling Street from Bedford Avenue. Here's a few representative religious institutions. Grace Reformed Church on Bedford Avenue on the left, and then St. Francis of Assisi Church on Nostrand Avenue on the right. We have a few examples of the mixed-use buildings. East side of Nostrand Avenue on the left-hand side there, and on the east side of Rogers Avenue between Midwood and Maple. Note that wonderful fire station on the right there. Last slide, this is an example of apartment building on the west side of Bedford Avenue. The period of significance for the historic district extends from circa 1890, when the earliest buildings in the area were developed, to circa 1940, when the neighborhood was largely developed. We have a letter of support from New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. I also received an enthusiastic letter from a property owner of the district. We do have 4 letters of objection. These were generally, just don't want to be in a National Register district. Some people, there is an overlap of an LPC district, so some were a little confused with that, but it's very common to have a few objection letters. This area is within a qualifying census tract, so homeowners largely have been supportive because they want that access to the state homeowner tax credit. So I foresee a boost of some activity in this neighborhood if this is approved. So this is the district. Any questions?
First, there are several errors throughout the text, dropped words and typos, and I trust that they'll be corrected. But more importantly, my position, and I would like to urge the board to insist that the staff and consultants identify a different name to be proposed, to be given to this proposed National Register district. Why? Because in 1979, the Landmarks Preservation Commission designated a historic district called Prospect Lefferts Gardens, and it encompasses almost an entirely different geographic area. Why would we agree to engendering substantial confusion by listing on the National Register a district called Prospect Lefferts Gardens when one exists locally that is in largely a completely different location? So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we as a board could ensure that the name of the district be changed. One could do something as uncreative as Prospect Lefferts Gardens too, but I bet the staff and consultants could think of something much better than that.
Sure. We didn't have any comments on the name, but we can certainly look into that. It's the neighborhood, so we felt because it's not Lefferts Manor, that was the specific estate. So, but we can certainly reach out to the project sponsor and see if they might have suggestions for a different name.
Thank you, Linda, but I'm a Brooklyn resident and I bicycle around both of these historic, proposed and existing historic districts, and Lefferts Manor would just further kind of confuse things. It needs to be identified by the area that's within the boundaries of the proposed district, and I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities.
Thinking about making a motion with that as the stipulation.
Would you like to phrase it? Let's have us.
I have a question because isn't there a neighborhood association
Yes,
that's involved in this with this name?
Yes.
So are they involved in this nomination? I thought they
Yes,
were.
this was sponsored by the Prospect Lefferts Gardens a Heritage Council, and that's the name of the neighborhood association as well.
So that to me is a complicating. I hear understanding what you've said. To me, there's like this complicating thing, right? There's this Heritage Association putting this forward. So, right, that means changing their entire name too? No?
No. I don't think so.
I mean, okay, go ahead. No.
I don't think so, but certainly when the staff or the consultants could converse with them and engage them in thinking about how to promote clarity. Believe me, I'm from Brooklyn, and I know when clarity is missing, and this is going to cause confusion.
I just want to say, I mean, sometimes we do have districts, trying to think like Sugar Hill, right? We've got the National Register listed Sugar Hill Historic District. I don't think those boundaries are the same. Isn't there a local Sugar Hill Historic District, right? And those are not one and the same. So we often do have same names with different boundaries that represent, there might be some overlap, some Venn diagram overlap, but it's not uncommon for this occurrence to happen, particularly in New York City.
Fully aware of that and appreciate your comment, Kathy, but I do think it remains confusing to people that live there and, you know, are aware of those areas when indeed very much of the district that's proposed is outside of the existing Prospect Lefferts Gardens district that was designated locally in 1979. I think of the neighborhood as being part of like greater Prospect Lefferts Gardens. It's beyond, there's an identity to the already designated 1979 district that is, one can feel bicycling around that's different than this area. And I just don't know what the name of this area would be. I don't live in that part of Brooklyn, so I don't have an answer, but that's why I'm asking for the staffs and the consultants to put their thinking caps on. Maybe there's a better way to deal with this.
More important that we hear from the neighborhood association more than staff, because what do we know, right? Now, LPC, of course, has already, I assume, they have sent in a letter.
Yes,
in-
they
but
submitted a letter of
yeah,
support for the
support,
nomination.
and they've not
Mhm.
commented like, oh, should be named something different. But we can certainly have a conversation with the sponsoring
Yes, I
neighborhood
could-
association to ask them.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
always
not sure.
difficult.
I'm not sure what other name they would come up with because they identify they were completely supportive of the name. But I can certainly speak with them to see if they have other ideas.
I mean, I guess my only question would be, what if the neighborhood association says, no, we want it to be this name? They're the people that live there. I'm just saying that.
Oh, I would agree with
hypothetical.
you. If that were the case, then that's fine. But the conversation needs to happen.
Will be to approve with the understanding that the sponsors of this nomination will contemplate a change in name. Do I hear a second? All in
Second.
favor? Any opposed or abstain?
Because I don't live in Brooklyn, so I respect but isn't the neighborhood association sponsoring this? So that's why I feel like it's not our place. If they've already, am I misunderstanding?
So you're opposing the request for the name change, not the eligibility of the
Sorry,
district?
I would, yes, I'm sorry. If the motion is to approve it with that stipulation that they come up with a name change, I feel uncomfortable telling this local group to do that. I would not be opposed at all to approving this. If it were maybe more like, I feel like it's inappropriate for us to tell them to do that. Maybe if the language is different, am I making sense?
Yeah, I think that the proposed resolution that Doug suggested, we're not telling them that they should change the name. We're having a conversation to ask them what they think, as Kathy was supporting.
And so the motion would be, right, to, if you are in favor of this, the stipulation would be, yes, we're going to have a conversation with the sponsoring neighborhood association. And if they feel there's another more appropriate name, a different name, but it's entirely up to them. They may land on, no, we want this name, entirely up to them.
I misunderstood. I thought we were sort of
wordy
telling
than
them
it
they had to
needed to
come up
be.
with another name, and
Yeah.
that's where. So am I able to retract my?
Yes. You are able to
I'm sorry
retract
for
your
that.
opposition.
I misunderstood what level we were putting on that. So, thank you.
I did, because I made the motion. And who seconded?
To say that it's going to depend on the incentive. I mean, if, depending on how eager they are,
Right.
if they get this signal from Albany, they'll say, well, we don't care, we'll do whatever it takes.
All right, so I think ultimately the motion passed unanimously. Yes, we did.
Hello, everyone. Zoom it this direction. Perfect. So I am going to present today. Can everyone hear me all right? The Tiaranda Estate Craig House Historic District. So the Tiaranda Estate Craig House Historic District in Dutchess County is significant under criterion A in the area of health and medicine, and under criterion C in the area of architecture. The period of significance begins in 1859, when the family of Joseph Howland, a Union Army officer in the Civil War, who would become the treasurer of New York State and a founding board member of the Hudson River State Hudson River State Hospital for the insane, ordered construction of a Gothic Revival estate house and its surrounding estate gardens, or surrounding estate grounds on the property. The period ends in 1950 with the death of Dr. Clarence Jonathan Slocum, founder of the Craig House Sanitarium, which occupied the property after the Howlands sold the estate. So in the map here. The historic district is located at the southern boundary of the city of Beacon and partially in the town of Fishkill. The district represents the core of the former early 20th century Craig House Sanitarium, which itself was developed on the former mid-19th century estate of Joseph and Eliza Howland. The nominated property includes land from the Howland estate, known as Tioronda, as well as surrounding lands that retain integrity to the period when the property served as the Craig House Sanitarium. The district contains 7 contributing buildings and 1 non-contributing building, all circled in red here on the map, and is significant for both the original estate and sanitarium use periods. The district is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an excellent example of an architect-designed mid-19th century estate, designed by Frederick Clark Withers, a protege of Andrew Jackson Downing and Calvert Vaux. The Howland Estate House, Tioronda, was designed as a monumental example of Gothic Revival style and was constructed in 1859. The house is characterized by a polychromatic brick exterior with stone lintels and sills, steep gabled roofs, dormers ornamented with elaborate barge boards, pinnacles, pendants, and brackets, and a large projecting porte cochere. Architect Richard Morris Hunt, brother-in-law of Joseph Howland and the first American to study architecture in the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, designed a music room addition that was constructed in 1873, which blended with the Gothic Revival style while displaying strong French influences. And unfortunately, that addition you can see in the historic photo, it's covered up by the tree over there on the left. Looks the same. Though few outbuildings from the estate period survive, the Tioronda School building remains extant. Also designed by Withers to match the house, the building was constructed in 1864 at the request of Howland, an avid philanthropist, to function as a freely accessible school and chapel for local children. You can see here some historic landscape photos. The landscape of the estate was designed by horticulturalist Henry Winthrop Sargent, a friend of Howland, Withers, and Downing, whose own property, Wodeneth, I believe I pronounced that correctly, now known as the Christie House, neighbored Tioronda to the north across the Fishkill Creek. Sargent worked with Withers to incorporate beautiful view sheds from the estate house, following Downing's philosophy of unifying built and natural landscapes. Sargent acted as caretaker to Tioronda while Howland served in the Civil War, planting many rare trees and shrubs across the property. This beautified landscape, coupled with the high-style residence, caught the eye of psychiatrist Dr. Clarence Jonathan Slocum, who purchased the estate from Howland's wife after his death, converting it to the Craig House Sanitarium. For its use as the sanitarium, the district is significant under criterion A in the area of health medicine. Craig House was an American pioneer in the use of treatments and care associated with the moral treatment movement in psychiatry, a philosophy for mental health treatment that focused on individualized care in a similarly high-styled and beautified built environment. The 2 gatehouses, which mark the entry points to the sanitarium, remain extant. Craig House opened in 1915 and operated under the moral treatment model until Slocum's death in 1950, when his son, Dr. Jonathan Slocum, also a psychiatrist, was forced to adapt the facility to more analytical and chemical-based treatment approaches, which were becoming standard practice of the time. This transition marked a slow but steady decline in long-term residency at the facility, which, coupled with the high overhead of the elegant estate, led to the closure of the facility in 2000. Craig House offered a large amount of recreational activities with a number of support facilities for its patients and their visitors, including guest houses. The one at the top there, I believe, is on State Park land, Hudson Highland State Parks, including guest houses such as the one seen at the top of the slide, and various sports fields and courts such as tennis courts, where the elegant tennis shed featured at the bottom of the slide remains extant. I like that that's a shed. It doesn't look like my shed, but patrons of the facility included prominent figures such as Zelda Fitzgerald, wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, Rosemary Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy, and Frances Seymour Fonda, wife of actor Henry Fonda and mother of actress and activist Jane Fonda. The Crossroads House, seen at the top of the slide, which served as another guest house for the sanitarium, also remains extant within the district and is currently a separately owned private residence. The Keller Memorial Clubhouse, not pictured, is the only non-contributing building in the district. It was substantially altered in the early 2000s, but was one of the original estate buildings associated with the Howland family and the Du Bois family, who lived in the area prior to the Howland family in the early 19th century. A non-historic addition was built onto, and you can see that at the bottom there with the photo of the construction in the 70s, Non-historic addition was built onto the estate house in 1978 to facilitate the more medical changes in the treatment philosophy occurring at Craig House through that period. Its construction and current form can be seen at the bottom of the slide. That's the Tioronda Estate Craig House Historic District. It's come to us through the Part 1 PDIL process of the federal commercial tax credit program. The Part 1 is approved, and the estate house portion of the property is planned for redevelopment after decades of vacancy into a resort spa. We actually have the project consultant, Carolyn Coppola, who's here, and if you would like to say a couple words, then we'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, James, for that eloquent summary. There was a lot of information behind this nomination. And I am humbled and honored to be able to study and share the history of this extraordinary property and the people who dreamed it, who created it, who lived in it, and who cared for it. The nominated district represents movers and shakers in different fields over an extended period of time. I believe that the story of Tioronda Craig House Historic District begins with the visions of both Joseph Howland and Andrew Jackson Downing. I'm a longtime fan of Downing, who popularized the Gothic Revival style of domestic architecture in the United States. He believed this style to provide an emotional refuge for inhabitants and a defense against the bitterness and strife of the world. Downing, though not an architect, saw the land and house as a unit. His partner and disciple, Frederick Clark Withers, and colleague, Henry Winthrop Sargent, designed the buildings and landscape of Tioronda Estate, creating a country escape for the Howlands. Howland's brother-in-law and AIA founder, Richard Morris Hunt, continued the enhancement of not only Tioronda, but of the surrounding area, designing buildings that the Howlands gifted to the community, some of which still stand today. When psychiatrist Clarence Jonathan Slocum first saw Tioronda in 1915, and this was after looking at other properties in the Hudson Valley, he instantly knew that he had found the perfect place for his new sanitarium, where he could provide moral therapy. Craig House may have been the first sanitarium in the United States to offer this kind of treatment. I do think that Slocum felt that sense of refuge that Downing believed was embodied in Gothic Revival buildings in specific settings. Slocum purchased adjacent country estates, including Wodeneth, the estate of Sargent, the landscape architect in this case, to accommodate his expanding client base, which amounted, and the Craig House ended up amounting to over 365 acres. So when Dr. Slocum died in 1950, his son Jonathan, also a psychiatrist, took over the hospital. But due to the regulations and treatment of the mentally ill, most of the property was sold because it was no longer necessary. In the case of Wodeneth, when that was sold, it was used by the fire department as practice, and it was burned down. And it's interesting to note that while great portions of Craig House had to be sold, the younger Slocum held on to the original Tioronda estate until 2000, when he closed the doors for good. Because of the stewardship of both Dr. Slocum, 7 buildings do remain, 4 on the original Tioronda estate property. And these buildings have found new stewards willing to carry the history forward, adding more to the story of this remarkable place. The old Tioronda estate is poised to become a boutique inn that pays homage to all the people who envisioned its beginning and its future. Thank you for considering this property.
Is there comments from the board?
I'm reasonably familiar with the property, and I'm delighted that it's going to find a new use and a new future. One of the features, though, that really I hope will be protected is the open space character and the extraordinary plantings. And although I haven't seen it really in these photographs, and I commend the collection of historical photographs, they're wonderful, is Sargent's hemlock. And it seems to me there were 1 or maybe 2 right next to the house. This was a novelty discovered by Henry Winthrop Sargent up in the high hills of the Highlands, a hemlock that was growing in a completely different way with weeping branches. And the most famous example of it was planted in his neighbor's backyard, so to speak. And the weeping hemlock that you can, I think, still buy in arboretums and so forth, really comes from that and bears the name of it. So it's the original weeping hemlock. I know we don't nominate trees to the National Register, but it's worth mentioning if it has survived. I haven't been down there in recent years, and maybe it's no longer there. Good.
So yeah, and that's just to touch on that. And that's something that part 2 is currently under review with our technical preservation staff, and they're looking at the landscape and things like that.
Want to make a motion?
The approval.
Second? Brian? All in favor? Abstained or opposed? Carries.
Okay, Stewart Park. Stewart Park occupies 179 acres of level land owned by and located in the city of Ithaca, Tompkins County, New York. The park is bounded to the north by Cayuga Lake, on the east by Norfolk and Southern Railroad, to the south by Pier Road, and on the west by the Cayuga Inlet, which you can see in the very nicely drawn map. That's correct. That not. Oh. Sorry about that. This nomination includes 5 contributing buildings, 15 contributing structures, and 2 contributing sites: the Newman Golf Course and the Fuertes Bird Sanctuary, created in honor of noted ornithologist and Ithaca native Louis Fuertes. Together, these elements demonstrate the development and use of this recreational space during the period of significance from 1893 to 1956. The structures in the park include 2 WPA-era footbridges, the Stewart Memorial Flagpole, and the Herschel Carousel, built by Allen Herschel Co. Incorporated, North Towanda, New York, and placed in the park in 1951. Carousel features cast aluminum horses carefully repainted in 2015. The shingle-style buildings designed by Vivian and Gibb contribute distinctively to the Stewart Park landscape as notable examples of the recreational architecture. These are the previously listed Cascadelia Boathouse, the Dance Pavilion, and the Picnic Pavilion shown here. The 1956 expansion to the golf clubhouse, shown in the upper left, marks the end of the period of significance. The 9-hole Newman Golf Course opened in the spring of 1935, soon to be redesigned 1940-41 with longer fairways. The course spans approximately 80 acres and was constructed by workers employed through the Civil Works Administration program established under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. The course was part of an overall landscape development plan created for the city of Ithaca by local landscape architecture firm Hewitt and Metzger. Park landscape today largely retains Hewitt and Metzger's plan, including the curvilinear paths, footpaths, bridges, stone structures, and viewing platforms. Stewart Park also hosted one of the earliest motion picture studios in the country. In 1915, Wharton Studios Incorporated converted the dance pavilion into a motion picture stage and utilized the park landscape for numerous silent movies. The former dance pavilion retains most of the Wharton Incorporated renovations, and plans are being made to make the building a museum. Stewart Park is significant under Criterion A as a recreational park laid out in phases from circa 1893 to 1956. Property is further significant under Criterion C for its 1890s shingle-style arts and crafts inspired recreational buildings designed by locally significant architectural firm Vivian and Gibb. Stewart Park strongly exhibits holistic preservation and continued use of multiple park components reflecting the distinctive character of historic municipal parks. This nomination has letters of support from Mayor Lewis of Ithaca and the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Just a quick comment to support this nomination. Personally, pretty familiar with Ithaca through my parks job and other life moments. I went to graduate school up there. As much as I love to flatter myself to think that some of our great state parks, which are in and around Ithaca, some of which have public transportation, are accessible to the working communities, especially the working communities of color that are downtown, Stewart Park is within walking distance, and it has access to the lake. And even though, again, we have state parks that also have access to the lake, they are far up the lake. I mean, this is a gem and allows these communities easily to hang out at the lake, which is, believe it or not, a little bit tougher than you would think. So this is an amazing project. Also, Newman, quick comment on Newman. Is some of this going into any remediation of Newman? Because I do know when it rains there, you suddenly you're slogging through. You need your waders to slog through the fairways. So I don't know if that's part of this process or not. If it's not, then just
an honorary listing.
An honorary listing. Okay, very good. Well, strike that from the record that Newman needs some help. But it's but yeah, this is a great project.
Would suggest that a couple of sentences be added about Louis Fuertes. He was considered a latter-day Audubon, an enormously gifted ornithological artist, but also a great believer in ornithology as an education for the young. And his influence was huge. He died young, as the nomination reports. But it seems to me that the fact that Cornell is the leading institution in this country in ornithology must have a direct bearing on the fact that he lived in Ithaca and I believe taught at Cornell. So maybe a little bit more about who he was and why his name is associated with this wonderful nomination.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to join you. Sorry to be late. Brian, I do want to express the eligibility / listing of this property will make it eligible for the OPRHP Parks Development Grant Program. So there is indeed substantial funding that can flow to Ithaca once the nomination is achieved. So.
Do I hear a motion? Brian Irwin, second. Jennifer, all in favor? Any opposed or abstained? Passes unanimous. Last, but not least.
Yes.
Prattsburg.
Prattsburg. All right, the Prattsburg Commercial Historic District nomination is an approved PDIL, meeting Criterion C Architecture and Criterion A Commerce. The district lies in the unincorporated hamlet of Prattsburg, population of about 600, in Steuben County in the southern tier Finger Lakes region of New York State, approximately 7 miles west of Cayuga Lake. New York Route 53, Main Street, is the hamlet's main thoroughfare and also the main commercial street. The center of the hamlet and the nucleus of early settlement is a large rectangular park. The hamlet's business district is a single block of 2- and 3-story mixed-use commercial buildings, which faces the west side of the park along Main Street. Here we see the main block of buildings looking southwest. This unified block of commercial buildings arose between the 1870s and 1936. Most of the buildings are similar in character, 2- and 3-story, 3-bay brick buildings with wood and cast iron storefronts. Upper stories are characterized by corbelled frieze decoration, projecting decorative cast iron cornices, stone sills, and decorative cast iron lintels. The Prattsburgh Commercial Historic District encompasses all of the hamlet's surviving historic commercial buildings on Main Street and a group of 5 buildings behind them that were built as associated warehouses, shops, stables, and are closely related in period and function. 24 Main Street was rebuilt following an early 20th century fire that destroyed the original building. And as illustrated on this 1913 Sanborn map, between the yellow and blue colored buildings, screen left, the new building included a drive-through covered alleyway, allowing vehicles to access the secondary buildings to the rear from Main Street. The alleyway still exists, but has been infilled at the Main Street entrance for safety reasons. The buildings accessed by the covered alleyway also retain historic character in keeping with their Main Street counterparts. Along Main Street, the Prattsburgh Commercial Historic District features a solid block front of buildings of similar size, massing, materials, date, and function, as can be seen in contemporary and historic photographs, in this case looking from the southeast to the northwest. Although a small hamlet, Prattsburgh prospered through opportunities arising from the creation of canal and railroad networks in the 19th and 20th centuries. And despite subsequent economic decline, the Prattsburgh Commercial Historic District retains much of the historic character of its defining period. Thank you. There's 3. Sure. Kath, come on.
This first came in as a compliance project, and then the owner said, well, how can I get some of those tax credits? So Dan and I kind of took this on and wrote it together because the owner owns most of these buildings, and he's already submitted 3 tax credit projects. And as you can see, this is the entire commercial center of Prattsburgh. And so we're kind of excited about restoring historic downtown Prattsburgh. So Dan did a lot of research on it, and I helped him pull it together. So
Yeah, the owner has been very eager to work with the technical staff to do the best that he can with the money that he has.
Any comments from the board? Daniel?
It'll be ironic that this little community in Steuben County might be the first to be 100% tax credit redevelopment funded. That is achievable here.
Do I hear a motion? Win second. All in favor? Opposed or abstained? All right. Dan. Have one more item on the agenda. We also have blown by lunch. Do we want to grab food and have sort of a working lunch to talk about the next agenda item? Kath, is that okay? Who's presenting this?
Oh, actually, Chelsea, it's going to be pretty quick.
Are you running to do it before lunch?
It'll be really quick.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, look.
Hello.
Everyone, call your attention back real quick. Okay, so real quick, we're almost done. I know we've gone over. I'm just going to go over one quick thing. As you'll recall, the John Dean McKean fireboat, so a quick update on that. The fireboat, as you remember, was unanimously approved for listing on the State Register of Historic Places at the December State Review Board meeting following extensive discussion about the request for delay by the Village of Tarrytown. At the time, the municipality had requested a delay in order to allow for additional time to review the nomination, but no additional information about their concerns was initially provided. The board moved to list the fireboat and allow for a 60-day holding period before the nomination was sent to the National Park Service, thereby allowing the time for Tarrytown to provide comment. Well, since the December meeting, the village has provided the State Historic Preservation Office with further clarification about their concerns, including those involving health and safety. The board was provided the Tarrytown response letter prior to this meeting. After thoughtful evaluation and what we consider due diligence at the local level, Tarrytown has ultimately objected to the National Register listing. It's our understanding that the Fireboat McKean Preservation Project, the owning entity, has already docked the vessel in Stony Point with the intent to make the Panco Terminal Marina its new home port. So this differs from the original, or what was stated in December. The SHPO continues to actively work with the sponsor to make the necessary changes to the nomination before submitting it to the National Park Service. We feel that the change of home port address does not affect either the current state register listing or its status as eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. Upon confirmation of the boat's new home port location, the National Register listing process will move forward. Furthermore, the board's proactive listing of the vessel on the state register has already enabled the owners to apply for grants to help facilitate the restoration of the historic vessel. So it's already in motion on that regard. So any questions on the fireboat? I know there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting.
The problems elicited in the letter are resolved.
Well, so the problems that were listed in the Tarrytown letter were substantial enough that the owning entity of the boat decided that they would not dock there.
Fantastic.
And so they're in Stony Port instead.
Problem solved.
Yep.
That's the report. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, we're doing our due diligence on our end as well, so we have a letter of support already from the marina owner.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Point, it's a private owner, right? We're not dealing with a municipality.
That is correct.
Okay, that sounds good.
Good.
The one last thing to make note of, I know email went around to board members previously, but the December board meeting date has changed. It was on a Thursday. It is now Monday, December 4th. So keep that in mind. Yes, at Canandaigua. Or no, so I'm sorry. The next meeting is at Canandaigua. Yes.
June?
Yes, June 8th.
I think it's June 8th in
Thursday, June
New
8th.
York.
Yep.
And December 4th, it's a Monday.
Yes.
That's going to be back here because it's the awards.
Capital Region.
Capital
Yes.
Region Awards ceremony.
Yep.
Daniel?
Good afternoon again. I left Kathy Howe with a very lengthy and detailed report on funding and legislative issues at both the, yes. However, she may not have been particularly prepared to answer any questions the board may have had about both the federal or state items, budget or legislative items. So I just wanted to offer my availability in the meeting or after the meeting to answer those questions. We did have I think ultimately what will prove to be a very productive trip to Washington, D.C. And, the score won't be known for a few weeks as we try to get signatories to the appropriations letters and see who the initial co-sponsors are for federal tax credit changes. But I think we had 2 very productive days down there.
Daniel, your report, as read by Kathy, really suggests once again that New York is the the beating heart and the teeming brain of historic preservation throughout this country. I mean, it is just more money, more enthusiasm, more applications. It's the way to go.
Well, that's good to hear. At the Monday NICSPO board meeting, we were set up in a large conference room much like this. The states were, there was some participation in the meeting in alphabetical order, by state. And in the case of state reports, it was simply going down the line. And so Ohio presented before New York, and one of the state preservation office staff in Ohio who was attending said, I just want to say that Ohio leads the nation in terms of the number of Part 1 tax credit applications and the number of Part 2 applications. And then there was this pause, and she said, so take that, New York. Oh, well, don't you worry, Kathy. Yeah, sorry. So the reports came around the table, it came to me, and I said I had prepared a very different report in terms of both substance and tone. But now that the Buckeye State has thrown down, please note their failure to mention Part 3 applications, in which case New York State just did $1.2 billion worth of activity in federal fiscal year 21-22, setting a new national record. So we just left it. We just left it at that. So, but it's interesting. She said, yeah, we get our quarterly reports from from the National Park Service, which list every bit of activity in the tax credit program state by state. She goes, we're always looking at what New York does first. I said, well, then that's another win for us. If you're marking yourself by us each quarter, then we win. So anyway, we got your back.
All right.